Picture this. It's the dead of night. Your house is silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on your chest. The world outside is still. No cars, no wind, no life. You're alone. Or so you think. Then you hear it. A sound. A faint scratch at the window. A creak on the porch. A shadow that moves just a little too slowly to be natural. Your heart skips a beat. Your skin prickles. Because deep down, in that primal part of your brain, you know. Someone's outside. Tonight, we're diving into 3 true horror stories that will make you question every noise, every shadow, every moment you spend alone. These aren't campfire tales or Hollywood scripts. These are real accounts from real people who faced the terror of something, or someone, lurking just beyond their walls. Stories so vivid, so haunting, they'll crawl into your mind and refuse to leave. So, lock your doors, check your windows, and maybe keep a light on. Because once we start, there's no turning back. Before we begin, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss the nightmares we share every week. And stick around to the end. I've got a question for you that might make you rethink being alone tonight. Ready? Let's step into the darkness. Story 1. The Man at the Window War first story comes from Emily, a 24-year-old graphic designer who thought she'd found her dream apartment in a quiet town in Ohio. It was 2019, and Emily had just moved out of her parents' house, eager for independence. The apartment was on the second floor of an old brick building, tucked away on a street lined with ancient oak trees that cast long, gnarled shadows at night. The place was small, but charming. Hardwood floors, tall windows that let in golden, sunlight during the day, and a cozy living room perfect for late-night Netflix binges. But at night, those same windows turned into black mirrors, reflecting nothing but darkness. And sometimes, something more. It was mid-November, and the air had turned crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and frost. Emily had been in the apartment for barely 2 weeks, still unpacking boxes, still getting used to the creaks and groans of the old building settling. That night, around 2 a.m., she was sprawled on her couch, her phone glowing as she scrolled through social media. The world outside was silent, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Then, she heard it. A faint tapping on her living room window. It was soft at first, almost delicate, like a fingertip brushing against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Emily froze, her thumb hovering over her phone. Her first thought was a branch. Maybe the oaks outside were swaying in the wind. But there was no wind. The air outside was still, the trees motionless under the pale moonlight. The tapping came again, slower this time, more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone was testing her, waiting to see if she'd react. Emily's heart started to race. She turned off her phone, plunging the room into darkness. The sudden absence of light made the silence feel heavier, thicker, like it was closing in around her. She sat there, barely breathing, her eyes locked on the window across the room. The curtains were open. She hadn't bothered to close them, thinking no one could see into a second-floor apartment. Now she regretted it. The moonlight filtered through the glass, casting long, jagged shadows across the hardwood floor. Shadows that seemed to shift, just slightly, as if alive. Then, she saw it. A shape. A shadow. It moved across the window, slow and unnatural, like it was swaying side to side. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was something out there, something that didn't belong. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her apartment was on the second floor. No balcony, no ledge, no way for anyone to be out there unless they were climbing the sheer brick wall. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize it. A bird? A bat? but the shadow was too big, too human. And then, it stopped. The shadow froze, right in the center of the window. Emily's stomach twisted as she stared, her eyes straining in the dark. The moonlight shifted, and there it was, a face. A man's face, pressed against the glass. Pale, almost gray, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to sink into his skull. His lips were thin, cracked and curled into a faint, unnatural smile. He was staring right at her. Emily screamed, the sound tearing through the silence. She scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp, her phone slipping to the floor. Her hands shook as she fumbled for it, her eyes darting back to the window. The face was still there, unmoving. Those empty eyes locked on her. She finally grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she whispered to the operator, "There's someone outside my window. Please, hurry." The operator asked her to stay calm, to describe what she saw, but Emily could barely speak. Her eyes kept flicking to the window, where the face remained, unblinking, that eerie smile never fading. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the face was gone. The tapping stopped. The shadow vanished. Silence swallowed the room again. The police arrived 15 minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the darkness outside. Emily stayed huddled on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife she'd grabbed from a drawer. The officers searched the perimeter of the building, checked the alley below, even climbed a ladder to inspect the window. They found nothing. No footprints, in the soft dirt below. No ladder, no rope, no sign anyone had been there. One officer, a gruff man with tired eyes, suggested it might have been a reflection. Maybe her own face distorted in the glass. Another said it could have been kids pulling a prank. But Emily knew what she saw. That face wasn't a reflection. It wasn't human. The police left, telling her to call if it happened again. Emily didn't sleep that night. She dragged a bookshelf in front of the window, closed every curtain and kept every light on. But the fear didn't leave. It clung to her, heavy and cold, like a hand on her shoulder. She tried to convince herself it was a one-time thing, a trick of her tired mind. But the next night, it came back. This time the tapping was faster. Almost frantic. Tap, 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 tap. It echoed through the apartment, sharp and relentless, like someone was desperate to get her attention. Emily sat bolt upright in bed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She didn't want to look at the window, didn't want to see that face again, but she couldn't stop herself. She crept to the living room, her bare feet, cold against the floor, and peeked through a gap in the curtains. The shadow was back, swaying slowly, but this time it wasn't alone. There were two shapes now, one taller, one shorter, both pressed against the glass. The taller one was the man from before, his pale face unmistakable, his eyes boring into her. The shorter one, she couldn't make it out. It was too dark, too vague, but it moved differently, jerking and twitching like a puppet on broken strings. And then, the voice, low, raspy, like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "Let me in." Emily stumbled back, her breath coming in short, panicked, gasps. The voice wasn't loud, but it felt like it was inside her head, echoing in her skull. She ran to her bedroom, locked the door, and shoved a dresser against it. The tapping grew louder, more desperate, now coming from multiple windows. Living, room, bedroom, even the tiny bathroom window. Tap, 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 tap. It was everywhere, surrounding her, closing in. She called the police again, but the line was static, garbled, like something was interfering. She hung up and tried again, and this time, the operator's voice came through, but it was wrong. Slow, distorted, mimicking the whisper she'd heard outside. "Let me in." Emily dropped the phone, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She curled up on the floor, clutching her knife, praying for morning. The tapping stopped at exactly 3 a.m., as if a switch had been flipped. Silence returned, but it wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. The next morning, Emily packed a bag and stayed with a friend. She refused to go back to the apartment alone, but she needed answers. A week later, she returned with her brother, burly guy who didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. They checked every inch of the apartment, every window, every corner. That's when they found it. Scratched into the outside of the living room window frame, so faint it was almost invisible, were the words, "I see you." Emily's brother tried to explain it away, maybe vandals, maybe a previous tenant. But Emily wasn't convinced. The scratches were fresh, the edges sharp, like they'd been carved recently. And they were on the outside of a second floor. Window. No ladder, no scaffolding, no way for anyone to reach it. Emily moved out the next day. She never returned to the apartment, but the fear followed her. She started noticing things, shadows in her new place that didn't match the light, faint tapping sounds late at night, always at 2 a.m. She began researching the building's history, digging through old records at the local library. What she found made her heart sink. In the 1980s, a man had lived in her apartment. He'd been quiet, reclusive, until one night, he vanished. No trace, no explanation. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises, tapping, whispering, before he disappeared. The official report said he'd likely left town, but Emily found a newspaper clipping buried in the archives. It mentioned a witness who claimed to have seen a pale man with hollow eyes standing outside the building, night after night, staring up at the second-floor windows. Emily doesn't know what was outside her window those nights. She doesn't want to know. But she swears, even now in her new home, she sometimes feels those eyes on her, watching, waiting. And every night, she closes the curtains and checks the locks, because deep down, she knows. He's still out there. That was just the beginning. If Emily's story made your skin crawl, wait until you hear what comes next. Out in the frozen wilderness, where no one can hear you scream, one man faced a terror that knew his name. Grab a blanket, because this next story will chill you to the bone. Story 2. The Footsteps in the Snow, our second story takes us to the frozen wilderness of rural Montana, winter of 2021. Jake, a 32-year-old mechanic with a taste for solitude, thought he'd found peace in a small cabin tucked deep in the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. The cabin was old, built from weathered logs, with a sagging porch and frost-covered windows that rattled in the wind. It sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by towering pines that blocked out the sun, casting the world in a perpetual twilight. Jake loved it. The quiet, the isolation, the way the world seemed to vanish out here. But on one snowy night, that isolation turned into a nightmare that still haunts him. Jake had moved to the cabin 6 months earlier, trading the noise of the city for the simplicity of the wilderness. He was a practical man, not one for ghost stories or superstitions. He'd grown up hunting in these woods, knew every trail, every sound, the hoot of an owl, the snap of a deer stepping on a twig. The cabin was his sanctuary, a place to work on his truck, read by the fire, and escape the chaos of the world. It had one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room dominated by a stone fireplace that kept the cold at bay. The nearest town was a 30-minute drive, and cell service was spotty at best. Out here, it was just Jake, the woods, and the endless Montana sky. That night, a blizzard was raging, the kind of storm that buries everything in white, where the wind howls like a living thing, tearing through the trees with a vengeance. It was late, past 11 p.m., and Jake was sitting by the fireplace, the orange glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. He was sipping a beer, half listening to the crackle of the fire and the wail of the storm outside. The cabin creaked under, the weight of the snow, but Jake was used to it. He'd weathered plenty of storms out here. Then, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Through the roar of the blizzard, there was a faint, deliberate crunch. 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 Footsteps in the snow, slow and heavy, like someone was trudging toward the cabin. Jake's hand froze on his beer, his eyes darting to the window. The glass was frosted over, the world outside a blur of white, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone was out there. His first thought was that it was impossible. No one could be out in this storm. The road was buried under 2 feet of snow, impassable even for his truck. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and no sane person would be wandering the woods in a blizzard. Jake set his beer down, his heart starting to pound. He told himself it was an animal, a bear maybe, or an elk, stumbling through the storm. But the footsteps were too steady, too rhythmic, too human. Jake stood, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and grabbed his flashlight from the kitchen. Counter. The beam cut through the dim room, shaking slightly in his hand. He moved to the window, wiping away the frost with his sleeve, and peered out. The snow was falling so thickly it was like staring into a void, the flashlight reflecting, back in a haze of white. He couldn't see anything, but the footsteps didn't stop. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They were closer now, right outside the porch, maybe 10 feet from the door. Jake's breath hitched. He wasn't scared, not yet. But he was uneasy. He'd lived out here long enough to know the wilderness didn't play tricks like this. He grabbed his hunting rifle from the closet, a .308 he kept loaded for emergencies, and checked the chamber. The weight of the gun steadied him, grounded him. He moved to the front door, the only way in or out of the cabin, and listened. The footsteps stopped, right outside the porch. Silence. Then, a knock. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Knock, knock, knock. Each one echoed through the cabin, sharp against the silence. Jake's mouth went dry. He gripped the rifle tighter, his knuckles white. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rougher than he intended. No answer. Just the wind, howling again, like it was mocking him. He waited, his eyes locked on the door. The knocking came again, harder this time. Knock, knock, knock. The door rattled in its frame, the old wood groaning. Jake's heart was hammering now, his mind racing. He didn't want to open the door. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put. But he needed to know. He stepped closer, the rifle raised, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just snow, swirling in the beam of the porch light. No one was there. But the footsteps started again, circling the cabin now, slow and methodical. Crunch. 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 They moved along the walls, past the kitchen window, toward the back of the cabin, then around to the other side. Jake followed the sound, moving from window to window, his flashlight shaking as he tried to catch a glimpse of whoever, or whatever, was out there. The footsteps stopped again, this time at the back door, a flimsy thing with a single deadbolt. Jake held his breath, his rifle aimed at the door. Then, the voice came. Deep, gravelly, like it was scraped from the bottom of a grave. "Open the door, Jake." Jake stumbled back, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. How did they know his name? He hadn't told anyone he was out here tonight. He hadn't even been to town in a week. His mind scrambled for explanations. A prank, maybe. Someone from town messing with him. But no one could have made it out, here in this storm. No one. The knocking came again, faster now, almost frantic. Knock, knock, knock. The back door shook, the deadbolt rattling like it might give way. Jake shouted, "Get out of here, I've got a gun!" His voice cracked, betraying his fear. The knocking stopped, but the footsteps didn't. They started circling again, faster this time. The crunching snow louder, more aggressive, like whoever was out there was taunting him. Jake backed away from the door, his rifle still raised, and moved to the center of the living room. The fire had died down to embers, the room growing colder, the shadows deeper. He could hear the footsteps circling, over and over, never stopping, never slowing. They went around the cabin 3 times, then 4, then 5, each lap marked by that relentless crunching. Jake's hands were sweating, the rifle slippery in his grip. He wanted to run, to get in his truck and drive, but the storm had him trapped. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps stopped. Silence crashed over the cabin, so thick it felt like a weight on Jake's chest. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Then, a new sound, a low, rhythmic scratching, like nails dragging across the wooden walls. Scratch, scratch. It started at the back door, moved to the side of the cabin, then to the front, slow and deliberate, like someone was marking the walls. Jake's stomach twisted. He wanted to look, to see what was out there, but his body wouldn't move. He stood frozen, the rifle trembling in his hands, as the scratching continued, circling the cabin just like the footsteps. Then, the voice again, closer now, right outside. The front door. "Jake, let me in. It's cold out here." Jake's knees buckled. He sank to the floor, his back against the couch, the rifle across his lap. The voice wasn't just deep. It was wrong, unnatural, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "It's not real. It's not real." But the scratching grew louder, more insistent, joined by a faint tapping now, like fingers on the windows. Tap, tap, scratch, tap, tap. He stayed like that all night, listening as the sounds came and went. The footsteps returned, circling again, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always unpredictable. The voice spoke 3 more times, each one more desperate, more demanding. "Open the door, Jake. I'm so cold." "Jake, I know you're in there." "Let me in, Jake. Now." At dawn, the storm broke. The snow stopped falling, and the world outside was still, blanketed in white. Jake hadn't slept, hadn't moved from his spot on the floor. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands cramped from gripping the rifle. He waited until the sun was fully up, its light cutting through the windows, before he dared to move. He grabbed his flashlight, his rifle, and a crowbar from the toolbox and stepped outside. The air was biting, the cold stinging his face. The snow was pristine, untouched, except for the footprints. Deep, heavy footprints, larger than any man's, circled the cabin in a perfect loop. They were uneven, one foot dragging slightly, like the person, or thing, had a limp. Jake followed them, his heart pounding, expecting them to lead to the road or the woods. But they didn't. The footprints started at the front porch, circled the cabin dozens of times, and stopped right back at the porch. No trail leading away, no sign of where they came from. Just a closed loop, like whatever was out there had appeared from nowhere and vanished into nothing. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he noticed something else. Scratched into the wooden walls of the cabin, faint but unmistakable, were marks. Long, jagged lines, too deep to be from an animal, too precise to be random. They ran along, every side of the cabin, some high, some low, like someone had been clawing at the walls all night. And on the back door, carved into the wood, were 3 words. "Open the door." Jake called the sheriff, his voice shaking as he explained what happened. The sheriff, an older man named Tom, who'd seen his share of weird things in these woods, came out with a deputy. They walked the perimeter, took pictures of the footprints and scratches, but their faces were grim. Tom told Jake it was probably a bear, maybe disoriented by the storm, but his eyes said he didn't believe it. Bears don't knock. Bears don't carve words. Bears don't know your name. Jake didn't stay in the cabin that night. He drove to town, checked into a motel, and spent the day trying to make sense of it. He called a friend, Mike, who'd grown up in the area and knew the local lore. Mike listened quietly, then told Jake about an old story. Decades ago, a trapper had lived in these woods, a recluse who'd gone mad after years alone. He'd wander the forest at night, knocking on cabins, begging to be let in. One winter, he disappeared, but people said he never left. Hunters reported hearing footsteps, seeing shadows, even hearing their names whispered in the dark. The locals called him the Drifter, a ghost, or something worse, that haunted the woods, always looking for a way in. Jake laughed it off, told Mike he didn't believe in ghosts, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. He went back to the cabin the next day, armed with a new deadbolt and a cheap security camera he'd bought in town. He installed it on the porch, aiming it at the front door, and spent the evening watching the live feed on his laptop. The night was clear, the stars bright, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. At midnight, the footsteps came back. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They started at the porch, just like before, and circled the cabin. Jake's eyes were glued to the camera feed, his heart racing. The porch was empty, the snow untouched, but the footsteps kept going, clear as day. He grabbed his rifle and checked every window, but saw nothing. The camera showed nothing, just snow and shadows. Then, the knocking. Knock, knock, knock. The camera flickered, the feed cutting to static for a split second. When it came back, Jake's blood ran cold. There, on the porch, was a figure. Tall, hunched, wrapped in tattered rags that fluttered in the wind. Its face was hidden in shadow, but its head was tilted, like it was listening. The voice came again, low and guttural. "Jake! Open the door!" Jake screamed, slamming the laptop shut. He didn't wait for the police this time. He grabbed his keys, his rifle, and ran to his truck, the engine roaring to life as he sped down the snowy road. He didn't look back, didn't stop until he was in town, safe in the motel's fluorescent light. The next morning, he checked the camera footage from his phone. The figure was gone, but the footprints were there, circling the cabin, deeper than before. And the scratches on the walls were new, fresher, with one word carved over and over. Jake. Jake sold the cabin a month later. He moved to the city, as far from the woods as he could get. But he still hears the footsteps sometimes, late at night, when it snows. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And sometimes when the wind is just right, he swears he hears that voice, faint and far away. Open the door, Jake. If Jake's story left you chilled, brace yourself. Our final story is about a mother, a child, and a whisper that came from the darkness. A whisper that knew too much. Get comfortable, because this one will make you afraid to open your windows at night. Story 3. The Whisper in the Dark. Our final story takes us to a quiet suburb in Texas, summer of 2023. Sarah, a 34-year-old single mom, lived in a modest 2-story house with her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. The neighborhood was the kind of place where kids played in the streets, neighbors waved from porches, and life felt safe. But safety is an illusion, and for Sarah, one warm summer night shattered that illusion forever. Sarah's house was small but cozy, with white shutters, a tidy lawn, and a backyard lined with crepe myrtle trees that bloomed pink in the heat. The living room had big windows that Sarah loved for the sunlight they let in, but at night, she kept them open to catch the breeze, the hum of crickets filling the air. She'd moved here after a messy divorce, wanting a fresh start for herself and Lily. By day, she worked as a nurse, and by night, she was a devoted mom, reading bedtime stories and tucking Lily in with a kiss. That night, July 12th, started like any other. It was around 1 a.m. Sarah was in the kitchen, washing dishes, the faint glow of a single bulb casting soft shadows on the counter. Lily was asleep upstairs, her room a fortress of stuffed animals and fairy lights. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the occasional clink of dishes. Sarah was tired, her shoulders aching from a long shift, but she liked these quiet moments, when the world felt still. Then, she heard it, a whisper, soft, almost swallowed by the night, coming from the backyard. "Sarah." It was so faint she thought she'd imagined it, a trick of her tired mind. She paused, her hands dripping with soapy water, and listened. The crickets kept, chirping, the breeze rustling the trees. But there it was again. Sarah. Clearer now, low and breathy, like a voice carried on the wind. Her skin prickled. She set the dish down, wiping her hands on a towel, and moved to the kitchen window. The backyard was dark, the crepe myrtles swaying gently, their shadows dancing across the grass. She saw nothing, no movement, no figure, just the empty yard bathed in moonlight. She told herself it was the wind, or maybe a neighbor's TV left, on too loud. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Sarah shut the window, the latch clicking loudly in the quiet. She checked the back door, twisting the deadbolt until it felt secure. Her heart was beating faster now, a nervous flutter she couldn't shake. She moved through the house, checking every window, every lock, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The living room, the dining room, the front door, all secure. But the whisper came again, closer now, right outside the back door. "Sarah, come outside." Her blood ran cold. The voice was soft but insistent, like it was pressing against the glass trying to get in. She grabbed her phone from the counter, her hands trembling, and checked the time, 1:07 a.m. She considered calling the police, but what would she say? That she heard a whisper. They'd think she was crazy. Instead, she turned on every light in the house, the sudden brightness making her feel exposed, like she was being watched from the darkness outside. Then, the worst sound of all, Lily's voice, small and sleepy, from the top of the stairs. "Mommy, who's talking outside?" Sarah's heart stopped. She ran upstairs, her feet pounding on the steps, and burst into Lily's room. Her daughter was sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed bunny, her eyes wide with confusion. "Lily, honey, what did you hear?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Lily blinked, her voice barely a whisper. "The man outside. He said your name, Mommy." Sarah scooped Lily into her arms, her mind racing. She carried her downstairs, holding her close, and locked them both in the living room. She pulled the curtains shut, the fabric trembling in her hands, and sat on the couch with Lily curled against her. The whispers had stopped, but now there was something new. Footsteps. Heavy, uneven footsteps pacing outside the living room window. Thump, thump, thump. They were slow, deliberate, like someone was dragging their feet through the grass. Sarah's breath hitched. She clutched Lily tighter, whispering, "It's okay, baby. It's just the wind." But she didn't believe it. The footsteps stopped, and then came the scratching. Scratch. Long, slow, like nails dragging across the glass. Lily whimpered, burying her face in Sarah's chest. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, moving from the living room window to the back door, then to the side of the house. And then, the voice again, desperate, almost pleading. "Let me in, Sarah. I'm so cold." Sarah's hands shook. As she dialed 911, her voice barely steady as she told the operator someone was outside her house. The operator promised to send a patrol car, but it would take 15 minutes. They were a small suburb, and the station was across town. Sarah hung up, her eyes darting to the windows, the curtains now feeling like flimsy shields against whatever was out there. The scratching stopped, but the footsteps returned, circling the house now, faster, more erratic. Thump, 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 thump. Sarah held Lily, rocking her gently, trying to stay calm for her daughter's sake, but Lily kept whispering, "He's still there, Mommy. He knows you." Sarah's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, honey?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lily's eyes were wide, her voice small. "He said he's been watching you. He said he's your friend." Sarah didn't sleep that night. The police arrived, searched the yard, and found nothing. No footprints, no scratches, no sign of anyone. They suggested it was kids, maybe a prank. But Sarah knew better. Kids didn't whisper her name in the dark. Kids didn't know Lily was listening. For weeks, the whispers continued, always at 1 a.m., always begging to be let in. Sarah installed cameras, motion lights, even a new alarm system, but the whispers came anyway. Sometimes Lily would wake up, saying the man was back, describing a tall figure with no face, just shadows where his eyes should be. Sarah moved away 3 months later, but the fear followed her. Even now, in a new house, she hears it sometimes, a faint whisper in the dark. "Sarah, let me in." And there you have it. 3 true stories of terror, of shadows and whispers lurking just outside, waiting for a crack to slip through. These aren't just stories. They're warnings. Maybe it was a prank, a trick of the mind, or maybe something else was out there. Something that knows your name. What do you think? Have you ever heard a whisper in the dark? A knock when no one should be there? Share your story in the comments. I read every one, and yours might make it into our next video. If these stories gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more true horror every week. Ring the bell so you never miss a nightmare. And one last thing. Tonight, when you're alone and you hear a strange sound outside, don't look, because you never know what might be looking back.